I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. These words were misattributed to Voltaire,
Written
by his biographer, Evelyn Beatrice Hall, and they have become, somehow or another, a beacon for freedom of speech in the modern age. In an authoritarian society though, there's a slight modification on that. Because it's more like, I disapprove of what you say, and I will definitely 100% put you to the death for saying it.
According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
everyone has a right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to see, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Freedom of speech is the thing that allows me right now to even speak with all of you, to be able to express myself without fear of censorship or retaliation. Freedom of speech is tremendously important on a societal level. It helps people to get to the truth through disagreements, debates, and potentially even fights that lead us closer and closer towards a true knowledge. Now, obviously different countries value this differently, and there are some people out there who don't necessarily want the truth. They would prefer, in many cases, to just allow themselves to believe what they want to believe, or to have an agenda that isn't impeded by the free exchange of ideas. You know, I was thinking about this as I was thinking about PianoGate, and how even through the hate speech, even through the misinformation, even through the disinformation, I do believe that freedom of speech is the precondition for existence in a free world, for the development of our mentalities, and a whole lot of other things along the way. Having freedom of speech allows you to take part in an exchange of ideas. And in this exchange of ideas, we're not just receiving, but we're also potentially giving, taking part in a feedback loop that allows us to grow and to transform the society around us with the power of our words. There are always going to be beliefs that we form in this world and decide the correct interpretation of, and so does everybody else. I'm not saying that you will move towards the truth, because that requires you to reason well and to argue well and to actually find information for yourself. But at the very least, freedom of speech offers you that possibility.
it can even be critical and look back on itself.
And in many cases actually, so we don't necessarily agree. And it can be on simple things like, for example, are dogs better than cats? Is Taylor better than Kanye? But then it comes into other stickier issues. Should we tax the rich to fund the poor? Is it right that children are allowed free access to the internet?
Have you apologized to the victims? Would you like to do so now? Well, they're here, you're on national television. Would you like now to apologize to the victims who have been harmed by your product? Show them the pictures. Would you like to apologize for what you've done to these good people?
Through every disagreement that you have with a random person out there, you learn something new. A new fact, a new idea, just something that you never thought of before. And although you might not actually be able to like shake hands, make up, or whatever have you right there, it really does help you come closer and closer towards better conclusions at the end of the day. In fact, if you think about it, isn't that the whole reason that we have courts, legal systems, and lawyers that train themselves in order to argue day in and day out? It's exactly because being able to come to the correct answer and as to what is right and what is wrong in society is something that doesn't take place automatically. It's not as if somehow or another a divine hand came down from the skies and decided this is the right way that we're going to be living our lives right here. No, it's very much something decided by human standards. Every creative work, book, piece of art out there was an expression of somebody else's freedom of speech. You wouldn't have access to works of art, works of literature that express contrasting views from whatever it is that the orthodoxy or your society had decided was right. Until and unless you have a culture that convinces people that they will face no repercussions for creating these works of art. Now, as an educator, I like to talk about how freedom of speech refines our own thinking. I know fully well that learning is something that you do not just by just memorizing things over and over again. It doesn't work that way. Rather, it's more of a process where you're kind of like building things up block by block, one after another, like an ever-growing Jenga pile. And taking part in discussions, discourses, and debates is essentially like building up that power, having it challenged by people, kind of like structural stress testing, so that you never actually end up in an enclave where you just start believing every single thing that you say because you enjoy the sound of your own voice. Last point I want to mention is that freedom of speech allows a person to become part of something larger than themselves. Throughout the entirety of our history as a society and as a species, words have mattered. They mattered during Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream, when he spoke about a future end to racial discrimination. They mattered when Theodore Roosevelt gave his famous Man in the Arena speech. And they will matter, shall matter, so long as we have the will to care about a cause that's greater than ourselves, to fight against injustice, and to stand up for civil rights in a world that will increasingly be dominated by technology, but at the same time will need greater humanity, compassion, empathy, and the ability to speak out against injustice, and ultimately change the world. Now, why do authoritarian societies hate freedom of speech so much? Why do they censor the media, repress the press, manipulate narratives, and ensure that online discussions never see the light of day? Well, there are several reasons for this. Authoritarian regimes often build their legitimacy on controlling narratives, ensuring that people end up believing what the party intends for them to believe, so that they can effectively keep them under control. Political parties do justify this sort of authoritarian control from the point of view of social stability and social control. Narratives, you see, allow for collective action, they allow for social organizing, and cause people to think in a way that moves them away from what the party actually wants and more towards their own desires, when in reality, the party would most clearly want all of that directed towards itself. And while that might just sound like narcissistic behavior from a psychopathic over-controlling boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is that you have, this desire to control is not totally unfounded. History provides many examples as to why authoritarian regimes should be afraid of freedom of speech.
Think of the downfall of Nicolae Ceausescu.
When dissent spread covertly in Romania, and eventually, after an epic protest, and the regime came to an end. Or take the collapse of the Soviet Union under Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika, after which people realized the corruptness of the government of the day, eventually bringing the Soviet Union to a smashing end. Or take the Arab Spring, where an incident of self-immolation and the hot mishmash of Twitter, Facebook, and citizen journalism led eventually to the transformation of Tunisia. Essentially, by ensuring that all competing narratives are quashed, hierarchy can be maintained, order can be preserved, discussions that might be inconvenient or otherwise difficult to deal with will just be silenced and never be had all the way. I mean, I can understand that perspective. It doesn't mean that I agree with it, but I can understand it. But I should say that from a practical point of view though, excessive control also leads to poor decision making. Everybody has their own strengths. Whether we like it or not, no single person is the best at everything in this world. By restricting the input of different people out there, effectively you're restricting the strengths that can come to the fore in a society and making it so that you decide everything that's best. But imagine if you actually rule a society and you were in charge of actually deciding how things would go for large numbers of people. If you weren't in that position and freedom of speech was not a thing, you would eventually be faced with a world where everyone around you is a psychopath, a yes man. Every single thing that you say gets responded to with yes sir, and the kinds of decisions that you make at the end of the day just end up being poor quality decisions because they're only formed from your own thoughts, your own perspectives, and not from actually learning from the world around you.
And so, bringing this all to a close,
none of these things, whether an exchange of ideas that gets us closer towards the truth, the chance to refine our thinking and get ourselves away from traps and echo chambers, or the chance to become part of something greater than ourselves, is likely to develop in a world without freedom of speech. Now, I don't live in America, and in fact, I don't necessarily live in a country that celebrates freedom of speech. For those of us out there who are in the free world, it's important to never look down upon freedom of speech or to take it for granted, because it is a right that's tremendously important to our development as a society. But at the same time though, as I think about freedom of speech, the words of Uncle Ben come to mind. With great power comes great responsibility. It's true that as a person in a country that celebrates freedom of speech, you can go out there and you can say whatever it is that you want. Short of inciting people towards crime or literally threatening people or whatever restrictions play along the way. I do believe that freedom of speech is something that should be used responsibly. Just because you can say something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should say something. And I do think that this superpower that we all have to be able to change our world and to transform our society is something that we need to use with a fitting respect for the power that it grants us. I'd like to first thank you for taking the time to listen to me and to hear out my perspectives. This represents an exercise of that freedom on my part that showcases the way that I think about the world in the way that I think is important for other people to know about. I don't think that I do it perfectly, and it's fair to say that there's no excuse for mediocrity, but I do believe that the most important thing out there is to recognize that you have a power that is incredible, and that if you can use it to help others and to ultimately make a difference in your world, then it's something that you should, because thousands upon thousands of people out there are waiting for you to reach your potential. Anyway, that's my piece about freedom of speech and why I think it's valuable. Now, do I think that it's totally something that we should have completely, all the way, 100%? Watch my next video to find out.